wanted to ask, or again, this finding I saw that I thought was so interesting, that Black parents were actually more likely to express concern about whether their children might be perpetrators of racism afterward. So doubtless they were concerned about whether their own children might be victimized, or they themselves, or other Black people they love, might be victimized by racism, but they're also concerned about whether their children might be perpetrators of racism. And in fact, more so, if I understood properly, than white parents were concerned about their white children being perpetrators. Do I have that right? And could you, I mean, what do you both make of that?
Yeah. So we don't see a change from before to after, but consistently across both time periods, Black parents are more concerned than white parents that their children might perpetrate racial bias, which I think on the one hand speaks to, again, maybe why we didn't see any change among white families, right? If you're not concerned that your child is ever going to perpetrate racial bias, you might not see a need to talk about it. And indeed, we found that, your level of concern did predict whether you were having these conversations. So the parents who were more likely to say they were concerned were more likely to be having these conversations. I think it's hard to know why that concern stays so low. I think one possibility that I think is worth exploring is, Brigitte mentioned this is a really violent case of racism. And so parents might be able to kind of not want to talk about that with their kids, but also look at that and say, oh, my child wouldn't do that. So if my child would never do that, then they would not be racist, right? If that's the bar now for racism is what happened to Floyd, then it might be easier for a parent to say, cool, I don't have to worry about that. And so I think it's, that's one concern of these really public and violent cases, that we also want to remind that there's lots of ways that racism, manifests in really obvious contexts like that, and in more subtle ways.
Brigitte?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because it has come to a point where people are pretty much equating racism with the KKK. I mean, it's got to be that extreme. And so it's sort of everybody can pat themselves on the back and go, well, I'm not a racist. I'm not a KKK member, and I'm not, I wouldn't go out and kill a Black man and sit on his neck. And so I think that's part of the problem. And it's Eduardo Bonilla Silva talks about it in his book, Racism Without Racists, that racism continues because everybody thinks they're not a racist. And I think just to comment on this issue of white parents not thinking that their kids are biased, that is one thing that I've found, that a big reason why parents don't talk about race is because they really don't think their kids have any biases, like no biases at all. There's one study I did and it was around 100 people. And I think 3 people said that their kids might be just a tiny bit biased. The rest of them, it's like no biases at all. But part of it, I think it's because their measuring approaches are not really valid. They assume that because, oh, well, my kid plays with everybody on the playground, and my kid has never said anything that was racist or biased. And so those are the things they're looking for, but they're not considering just all of these inputs from media, from society, the social inequalities that children are exposed to. They go to school, they see, the principal is white, the janitor is Black, and throughout their lives, this is what they see. And so they